Hello and welcome to my channel Frugalisama. My name's Sam, where I talk about all things dressmaking, and today is day 10 of 100 days of sewing, and today I'm going to talk to you about the fabric store Chelsea Raglan, which is what I'm wearing now. Quickly show you. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed and welcome to anybody who's new here. If you could please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell. It will tell you whenever I release new videos. I'm currently recording these 100 days of sewing Monday to Friday and just releasing them on a Wednesday and a Friday, just to help people show how accessible and affordable sewing is. So I will be using free patterns and doing a few sew alongs and a few chatty videos, just giving you some insights onto how to sew relatively cheaply. I thought I'd start with this Raglan tee as a first garment because it's quite a basic pattern. It does have some bias binding in it, but I'm going to show you how to do that without any specialist equipment. And just a few hints and tips along the way as to how to make it. So there will be a full sew along. Also at the fabric store, some people have found it quite difficult to find out to download the patterns. So I will be inserting a little bit of instructional on how to get hold of the patterns from the fabric store. And what I will do with that one is I will keep it as a separate video, because I'll probably be using some more of their patterns. They have quite a lot of good basic patterns there. I'll keep that as a separate video as well, but I'll keep it in this one so that you can just so you can find it and refer back to it. So onto the top. So essentially it's just a very basic Raglan sleeve top. So these are Raglan sleeves that cut right into the shoulder. And the actual sleeve part forms part of the neckline. There are no bust darts in this, and you've just got a turned up cuff. It finishes at, I would say that's probably in mid hip there. It just finishes there. It's available in sizes 33 bust to 48, 25-inch waist to 40 waist, and 35-inch hip to 50-inch hip. The ease in the bust is about 2.5 inches, so I made a size 8 to 10, which should give me 37 to 38 inch bust. The finished bust measurement for that is 39.5 inches. I've measured the finished garment, it's actually closer to 40, but that's close enough. The waist has got quite a lot of ease in it. It's up to about 11 inches with ease in it. So again, I made the size 8 to 10, and that is suitable for a 31 to 32 inch waist, which mine is 32 usually. I've got a little bit more weight on my waist at the moment, and that is a finished garment measurement of 41 inch at waist. And for my hips, it's there are about 2.5 inches ease in the hips as well. I wouldn't worry too much about the hip measurement because it does finish sort of fairly high up on the hips. Also, there are instructions on the blog post for making a full bust adjustment. So if you take a measurement at your high bust, which is there underneath your armpits, and compare it to the one across your full bust, which is there right across the apex. I'm just doing this roughly. And you've got more than 2 inches, you will probably need a full bust adjustment. There are no bust darts in this top. The ease is given by these little pleats here. So you probably, anybody who's sort of bigger chested than me will probably need the full bust adjustment. So the recommended fabrics for this are linen, and that is because the fabric store sell linen and all their patterns recommend linen. I've made this particular one is in a viscose. I've made it in a linen, which is this one here, white. So you can guess what the first thing I did as soon as I wore that is I spilled curry down it. I managed to get it out and I've worn it in loads and loads, and it is a perfect fabric for this top, is a linen, but it works equally as well in any kind of fabric with a drape. So this one's a viscose. The one that I've done for the so long is a viscose, probably a poly mix, I'm not 100% sure. And then I've also made it in this very lightweight cotton. It's almost a gauzy cotton, so you can kind of see through it, but it's not terribly see-through. It's got a little bit of texture to it, and that was a remnant that I picked up from my local fabric store, and I've made 2 tops out of it. They've all been made out of remnants or leftovers from other projects. It's a great little stash busting project is this. When you see the sew along, you'll see how I've squeezed it out of less than a metre. The pattern requirements say a metre and a half, and obviously that depends on what size you're going to cut, and the width of your fabric as well, that is quite important. But I have managed to squeeze all of mine out of smaller remnants, and I will show you within the sew along how I managed to do that on this particular one, and this is the one that I sewed for the sew along. So it's just a leftover ditzy floral. I bobbed a picture in of the dress that I made originally, but that's the ditzy floral. So you can see here you've got the pleats here at the front and the pleats at the back, and that just gives you that little bit of wearing ease. And you can also see that I bobbed a little label in at the back. The back and the front's quite similar, so I bobbed a little label in there so I can tell the back from the front. I've chosen this particular pattern as one of the first garments to sew up. Anybody can sew this. It's a simple pattern. I've made 4. I've made hundreds of things. It's not so simple that it's boring, but it's simple enough if you've never sewn a garment before. Simply because you don't have the issue of fitting. I will address fitting later on in the series, but I thought just for the first couple of garments I'd look at things that don't need an awful lot of fitting. I'm not saying that this is going to fit everybody, it probably won't. What I'm saying is it's not a fitted garment, so it's got that enough ease in it so that you're not having to faff about trying to make pattern adjustments unless you need to make a full bust adjustment, and like I say, that's on the blog post. So the pattern is a free download from the fabric store. The fabric store, when they do their patterns, it is sometimes a little bit tricky to navigate how to download, so I've inserted directions on how to do that, and also their instructions for sewing along are on a separate blog post, and that takes a little bit of hunting down sometimes as well. So I will put links to both the pattern and the blog post below, so that you can easily access them. But like I say, I've included a sew along in this video for you as well. It's about half an hour long, so hopefully it covers everything. But the reason I chose this pattern is that there are no fastenings. So you don't need to be able to do buttonholes or zips. The only haberdashery that you need is the thread that you're going to use. So a sewing machine and thread. There is bias binding around the neck, and I'm going to show you. You can use a bias binding maker. I do briefly touch on that, but if you don't have one of those, I show you a very easy attachable way of how to do bias binding without any specialist equipment. It is the one that they use on the blog post actually, and it's one that I've forgotten about, so it was a nice reminder. The ones that I've done previously, I've done the traditional bias method, which is the one where you do the single fold. And I will touch on single fold and what have you in a later video. But for now, we'll just say that this is an accessible way of doing your bias binding, and a quick one as well. So other than your machine and your thread, all you're going to need is paper and a printer, unless you send it off for printing, because you will need to download the pattern, and sellotape or Pritt stick or a glue stick to stick your pieces together. I'm not going to go into how to stick PDFs together neither, because it would make the video too long. but I will do that one day because I know some people do struggle a little bit with it. So yes, I think it's an accessible and affordable pattern. It can be made from scraps. You can buy the fabric if you live in the States. I think Fabric Store is based in the States. I believe their linen is very good. It's just that I don't live there, and it would cost me more in postage to have it sent across than it would cost me in fabric. So that's not something that I'm about to do. So yeah, it's a great little scrapbuster. I've got a little tip I use is for all my patterns that use very little fabric. I have a little hook here at the side of my sewing table where I keep all my patterns that are good for scrapbusting, and sometimes, not always, because I didn't for this one. Sometimes what I'll do is, if I've got some fabric out that I think I'll squeeze a smallish pattern out, so I do it for knits. So you do it there. I've got the acacia pants there, and I've got a little cami top pattern there, and this Raglan tee. I've managed to squeeze it out of some of the most awkward sizes. And it will be a good upcycle project as well. I'll just insert some photographs of a dress that my mum gave me, a 1980s, typical 1980s dress. It has a full skirt on it. It's not a full circle skirt, but it's quite a full skirt. And I thought it'd be interesting to see if I could squeeze the pattern out of that. I haven't cut into it because I've got other plans for that, but just to demonstrate that it would be quite a good upcycle project if that's the sort of thing that you like doing. There are just 21 pages to download on this pattern, so I always print at home. I very rarely send, unless I've got a real lot of pages, I very rarely use a printing company. It's quite an expensive option in the UK. So yeah, it's just 21 pages, take you 10 minutes to stick together, and then you're ready to go. I can just ask you to like and subscribe the videos if you like this sort of video, and leave any comments below if you've made this top before, or if you're going to give it a go. Let me know. Just one final thing. Claire over at Penguin and Pear has been making a Raglan top from Sew House 7, and she demonstrates how to do a full bicep adjustment. So I've got quite skinny arms, and there is quite a bit of ease there. But if you need a bit more room, she does give you a demonstration on how to do that. So I'll leave a link for that below as well. So onto the sew along. So I've linked below to the website for Fabric Store for this particular pattern, and you will need to either sign in or register if you haven't done already. And then you will need to click onto the free patterns, which is on the left hand side. I have just typed in Raglan to search for the pattern at the top there, but that link should probably take you straight to the Chelsea Raglan tee, which is this tee here. If you just click on that, and you will see here there's a red free download button. So you just click on the free download button and it will take you to a PDF. My computer automatically opens it in PDF in Adobe Reader. You will need to have that downloaded onto your computer. And if you scroll down, it gives you the sizing details and how much yardage you need there. So if you scroll down to that, that's where it'll tell you. And this bit there, where I'm circling there, will give you where the sewing instructions are. So to the top left here, click on that PDF, not on the paperclip where it tells you, and it will open the PDF for you. And that will open the pattern, and that's the bit that usually gets missed. It looks like you've got to click on the paperclip, and it's actually the PDF button next to it. And you'll see that it's in layers here. And you just need to choose whichever size you are. If you fall between two sizes, you can do that. You just eliminating every size that you're not and leaving the marker next to the size that you are. And then you can just go to File and Print, and just print off the first page just to make sure that your printing is accurate. Make sure that you print to actual size and not print to fit, so that it prints the correct size for you. And here you can see the print layout, so that you know how to stick your pages together, and you can see here it's just one size. Okay, so I've just got my fabric set up here, and I'm just wanting to demonstrate how to cut this Raglan tee. Both the back and the front are cut on the fold. To save fabric, I'm folding my fabric towards the middle. So one side into middle there, and this side into the middle here. So you've got a fold either side, because otherwise what you would have is a fold there, and you would place your pattern piece on like that, and you would have all this waste here, and it does need to be cut, both need to be cut on the fold. If you are short of material, you could add a seam allowance to the back there, maybe 5/8 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch, and then cut each side by side like that. You know, cut this one and fold, and put the seam on the back if you wanted to, if you were really short of fabric. I've got a remnant here that I made a dress from, so this is just what's left, and we've got we've got 85 centimetres there, and then a long bit there. So it's a good pattern to get out of awkward shapes. Oftentimes I've got sort of a long piece like this, where fabric's been cut. Like this, where fabric has been cut. And if it's wide enough, you can fold that in half. It's not actually wide enough, that piece. So I'm doing it out of this piece here. So just one thing to check when you folding towards the middle here is just to double check that you've got everything nice and even. So I'm just measuring from the edge of my selvage here, which is this bit here, and towards the edge of the fold, and I've got 13 inches. It's coming a little bit, so you've got 13 inches. Just make sure everything's lying flat, and you might notice that here at the bottom, hopefully you can see that it doesn't align at the bottom, and that's probably because the fabric when it was cut just wasn't straight. What's important is that everything is straight when you're cutting out. Don't try and straighten it out at the bottom, because that's not always an accurate way of doing it. So this pattern has been drafted so that both the back and the front, they're almost identical, but there is a difference. But they're both facing the same way. So we'll need to flip one piece when you place it on your fabric. So that piece is going to go that way up, and I'm going to flip that piece and put it that way up over there, and then I'm just going to cut round. I've got mine on a mat because I'm going to cut with a rotary cutter, but it can be done with scissors or whatever. And one final thing to remember is you've got this Raglan sleeve, which is quite a big piece, so I know that it will fit in there straight, and another piece will go across there, and I've already done that calculation. So this is just something to remember when you're working with a minimal amount of fabric, that you're going to get all your pieces on. You can't miss out a Raglan sleeve, else you'll have a really strange shaped top. Just before I cut into this front piece, a couple of things to note. I spoke about in my last video. Pay attention to the direction of print. This has not got a direction, so I will be able to cut either way. Make sure that your pattern is right up to that fold line, because it will, although not too bad on this pattern, but it will affect the fit. So obviously make sure you're right up to that fold line. And you'll notice also on this pattern here that generally you would have a square bracket to indicate that you are cutting on the fold line. It doesn't give you that square bracket on this pattern, it just gives you a grain line and it says place centre back on the fold of fabric. It does tell you, but sometimes you get used to looking for that and you might miss it. So I'm going to cut this back piece out now. The other last little thing is, because the back piece and the front piece are very, very similar, make sure you mark which is back and front, and make sure it's a marking that you're going to be able to see quite clearly. You could just put a big cross on the back in chalk, and just whatever method works for you, just keep it consistent throughout your sewing. And that's it for now. There's no notches on this pattern, so I don't have to look out for that with it being upside down, so we're okay with that. So one thing to know about this pattern is that it doesn't have the front and back sleeves marked on it. Normally on a pattern it will have a double notch at one side to indicate where the back is, and a single notch at the other side to indicate where the front is, and this pattern doesn't have it. So I can see that this side corresponds with the back, so I'm just going to put some notches in there, a double notch in there, so next time I come to this pattern I won't have to do this again. I will know next time. Should have done it the first time I did it, but I didn't. You live and learn. Every day's a learning day with sewing. But I'm also going to transfer that onto my front as well. These notches aren't going to line up with anything, it's just an indication as to tell me which is the back and which is the front, and it's going to be really quite difficult to tell once I start pinning. And then your first step is to attach the sleeves to the main bodice. So this is quite, I think this is quite unusual. Usually when you're constructing a garment, you would normally join the shoulder seams together first and then put the sleeves in. But the sleeves actually form the shoulder seams with a raglan tee. So I'm going to pin all that up and then I'll come back. Right, so I've got one back sleeve pinned on. I'm just going to pin the other one so that you can see what I'm doing. So, as in general, in sewing, you will put right sides together unless you're doing a French seam. You can French seam these if you don't have an overlocker. I've done a tutorial on that on one of my videos about Moore's bags. The only thing I would watch out with French seams in this is that we're going to be attaching bias binding around the neck, and it might cause a little bit of bulk, so it depends on the thickness of your fabric. But today I'm doing right sides together because I do have an overlocker. And start by pinning your ends. So right sides together, pin your ends. There's a little bit of a curve and you just need to ease that in. So if you just line up your ends, and this is a back sleeve onto the back. Like I say, I've indicated which is the back of my pattern with a pin. Or I put a cross on it as well, but the cross didn't work, so I'm just going to pin down here. And then I'm going to do the same for the front. So the front sleeves to the front bodice. And you'll end up with a big cross. Like I say, it's a bit different constructing this if you have constructed a garment before. Hopefully you can see how it looks before you go to sew it. It's just like a big cross. That's my back. I know that because it's got a pin in it. 2 sleeves here, and that's my front. These seams are going to be sewn at 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, or 1 centimetre. And I will go across to the sewing machine, sew those up, and serge them and press them, and then I will come back and show you. So the next part of the instructions is to create pleats on the front and the back, and you're making a knife pleat, which is just a little fold on either side of your centre, just making sure that they're symmetrical. I'm just going to roughly do it to show you what I mean, and then I'm going to go and measure it. So very roughly, quite difficult to see in this ditzy print, but you just folding your fabric about 1 centimetre, folding it there, creating a little pleat there. And this is because this pattern doesn't have any bust darts, so it's just creating a little bit of room.
Right, so I've got the pleats pinned there at the back, there at the front, and I'm just going to baste that in place before I put my vice binding on around the neck. Hopefully now you can see that I have done those little pleats there, sewn them in white so that you can see them, and all the inside is sewn, the sleeves are sewn, and I've done that in white thread as well so you can see it in overlocker. I am usually a bit of a stickler for using the correct colour thread, but I thought white would be easier for you to see. So the sleeves are sewn in. We're now going to create some bias binding for around that neck. It's the quickest way, but it is the most wasteful way, and that is simply lining up your straight edge of your fabric and cutting on the bias. And all the bias is a diagonal across your fabric, and it just gives a bit of stretch. I'm demonstrating it on this piece of fabric. This is just a remnant from whatever I had left. And it does, you know, it is already on an angle, but it's not on the 45-degree angle, so we'll need to trim it down. The pattern does call for 26 inches. Almost always with these pattern companies, they tell you to cut a little bit more, just for error. I've measured mine, and I know that it will fit this little piece. I think I've got 23 inches actually. You will need to measure yours, because yours might be a different size. So first of all, I'm going to line up my quilting ruler there and there. I can see that I've got a bit of a nick in there, so I'm going to try and avoid that. Very simply, you just cut it on the bias. It really doesn't have to be bang on 45 degrees, but as much on the 45-degree mark as you can to give that maximum stretch. And then it tells you to do it at 1.5 inches, so you come up there. Now this is slightly wider than what I normally use bias binding. Always cut that way. Now you've got one length of bias. You can feel the stretch there. So I've just bobbed some spray starch onto this fabric because it's a viscose, and I think it's got some poly in it or something. It was a bit resistant to pressing when I tested it, and I'm going to demonstrate how to use a bias tape maker, but I'm going to do it the way that the pattern directs you to a tutorial for making bias that doesn't require any equipment. So that's the method I'm going to use, because I want to make these videos so that people don't need any specialist equipment. But if you're using a bias maker, you will need this 18mm one. I've got two here. There's a clover one. I usually use that for 1 inch wide bias, and this is an 18mm one. It's a little bit wider. And basically, you pointy end of your fabric, poke it through with your pin, slide it through, and press like that, and you just keep going to the end. And this starch smells lovely. Wish it had smell-o-vision. So hopefully that demonstrates that for you. That's just a very quick way to use a bias tape maker. There are machines that do this now, but this project doesn't warrant a machine. You really don't need it. So you would just then attach that one side around your neckline, sew on the crease, and then flip it over. I'm going to demonstrate the other way today because, like I say, I want to be able to keep these tutorials accessible without any specialist equipment. And so I'm just going to iron it flat. Basically, all you do is iron this in half. Iron that in half like that, and then pin to the neck starting at the back, I'm just going to pin this binding all the way around my edge. So these raw edges are going to meet the raw edge of the neck, and I'm going to pin all the way around. Right, so we're all pinned in around the neck, so hopefully you can see that there, and we're just at the back here. You just need to join these two, so I'm just going to demonstrate how to do that. So I'm just going to butt them up against each other. So right on the back seam, I'm just going to put my final pin in there, and I'm going to, you need to sew these two pieces together, so just make sure you've got it the right length. I'm just going to bob a bit of a nick there through both pieces so I know where to align them. Open it back up again, flatten out your bias binding, and you're just going to put right sides together whilst it's flat, and you're going to go do sew a straight line through that. So you align your two little notches that you've put in your fabric in your bias binding, sew the right sides together like that, and then you should have it perfectly, the perfect size. And just bobbing a pin in across there, and I'm going to sew where that pin is across there, and it should be the perfect size for this neck hole. Right, so I've sewn those two pieces together like that, trimmed it, pressed it open. I'm going to fold it back as it was before, like that. I'm going to put that final pin in there, and then you sew around, all around the neck at 3/8 of an inch, and you will be sewing, making sure that this edge, the folded edge of your bias binding, is even. Right, so we've got the binding sewn on. The next stage is to press the binding away from the main part of your garment. So from the right side, you're going to press it up, and then you're going to turn it inside out, and you're going to press it all to the inside. And it's also telling you to clip into the curves. Now, sometimes when I'm doing a binding, I will go around it with the pinking shears, because that stops you. It's a lazy way of clipping. If you've got some pinking shears, it creates those notches that you require to go around a curve. But alternatively, you can just use a pair of scissors and clip to that stitch line. Do not go beyond it, you'll make a big hole. Just around the curved bits. So just around here and here, front and the back. Yeah. Not so much on your sleeves. It's not much of a curve on there, so you won't need it. And that just helps ease around a curve, stops it puckering. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to press it all, and I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to sew it. And I'll come back before I do that with another little tip. Right, so we're all pressed and pinned. Hopefully you can see that. I've pinned all to the wrong side. And one little tip, because the back and the front are so similar, I put a label in, just to remind me which way. You can actually see that binding there, and I always put my binding, join my binding at the back. Sometimes they advise you to do it at the side seam. I always do mine at the back, and that's just a little reminder if I've got no labels. But it's quite difficult to spot, and if you're a bit blurry-eyed in the morning, I think that's a bit easier to spot. And if you forget what you're called as well. If you don't have any labels, bit of ribbon, that'll do the job. Some people are a bit sensitive to anything in the back there, so you could just sew like a bit of red thread or something like that. I've done that before in the past, just to remind you which is back and front when they're very similar like that. Because the back is, in general, in dressmaking, the back is higher than the front.
and you'll be wearing it for about 2 hours and you think, oh, it's choking me, and that'll be why. So yeah, that's the top tip. So my second top tip is I'm going to sew this. You'll notice my pins are on the inside. I'm going to sew my bias binding down from the inside, and I do that because I've done it a few times from the other side, and occasionally you miss it and you've got to go back. There are no bias binding pleats. You can sew it from whatever side you like, as long as your tension in your spool is okay. If you make sure your tension's okay, it should be fine.
My machine's a Janome XL601, and this part here comes off, and that's called free arming. It's just removing that bit. You're giving yourself a smaller space to work with when you're going round curves. It's particularly good for armholes and neck holes, and I'll just show you why. So hopefully you can see that it's just a bit easier to get underneath. And I'm going to start sewing at the back and right on the edge. And so right on the edge of this fold of the bias binding here. Next step is to sew your side seams and your underarms all together, right sides together at 3/8 of an inch. Could French seam it if you want, but it is only 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on here, so you're working with quite narrow seam allowances. So I'm going to do both sides of that. I'm going to overlock them, press the side seams on my neck, and prepare for finishing the hem and the sleeves. They're just a turn up sleeve, so I'll show you how to do that, and then it's finished. You'll notice on the pattern. If you notice on the pattern piece here, it comes in ever so slightly at the hem there, and if you just make sure you follow that, it's just for when you're turning it up. It's not crucial. It'll stop it from puckering when you turn it under. Okay, so I'm going to sew those side seams and come back. Right, so side seams are finished, and I'll just show you how much this fabric is fraying and how important it is to finish your edges. So if you don't have an overlocker and you're using something like this viscose or a linen, you will need to finish your edges with a zigzag stitch, or the French seams if you can do the French seams. It's just, it will make your garment last longer. This fraying, eventually your fabric will deteriorate with washing, so it just gives it an extra bit of strength and a bit more longevity. Just a quick word about my overlocker. This is a Singer one that I got from Lidl. I think it was £129, I think. But what I was going to say about, you really don't need an overlocker when you start sewing. Please don't go out and buy one until you know you like it. But if you've got one, what I was going to say is, I almost always sew with 3 threads, just a bit of a money saving thing. That 4th thread is great if you're sewing with knits straight onto the overlocker, because it goes through your second needle. It's completely unnecessary for most woven garments. Any thread it up if I'm sewing straight onto knits. When I say straight onto knits, I mean I'm not sewing first on my normal machine and then sewing on the overlocker. Sometimes with a knit, you can do everything. At most jobs on an overlocker. So that's the only time I will have both those needles threaded. This is another probably wasteful thing that I do. I do tend to overlock my hems before I press. It's just an easy way of pressing up. I just use it as a guideline. But with this fabric, it does fray quite a lot. So it's an extra precaution really. It's just an extra finish. And I am a bit of a stickler normally for changing my threads. I would normally have this on a navy blue, but I had the white in before. I'm using white tomorrow, and I just thought it'd be easier for people to see as well. So that's why I've got white on. Right, so I've just pressed all my seams and my neckline, and whilst I'm at the ironing board, I'm going to press up my hem, which requires 1 centimetre and then 1 inch, and I'm going to do my cuffs on my sleeve as well. Just do it all together. And just a quick way of measuring your hems. I usually do it by eye now. I can usually sort of guesstimate by eye an inch, but if you're not quite as confident, I've just got it's just an old file that I've marked off certain measurements. If you slot that underneath, you can usually get your inch lined up to there. It's just one way of doing it. And then just press on there. And with it being cardboard, it should be okay. It won't melt. You just do that all around the hem and then pin it, and then you can go and sew it. The instructions for this pattern direct you to a tutorial for another top. They tell you to press under the edge by 3/8 of an inch or a centimetre, and then bring it up by 2.5 inches. But this whole entire length of this is only about 5 inches, and it makes it all a little bit tight. So I just do it by 2 inches. So I press it at 2 inches. You then sew that hem there close to the folded edge at 2 inches, and then you turn it back around and you press it up, and you're left with an inch cuff. I'll show you when I've finished it exactly how it looks. But just a heads up, you can try and do it at 2.5 inches, but it makes it really tight under there. Let me just get my tape measure and show you. So 2.5 inches is it's right under that armhole. So 2 inches is just a little bit easier to manipulate, and it gives you a nice 1 inch cuff. Then just onto the very last stage, I've sewn the hem. I've sewn it from the wrong side. You really can't tell at the right side. You probably can't see anything at all with this floral print. I've sewn up, pressed up the sleeves and sewn them at 2 inch, and I've just come in at about 1/8 of an inch there. So I've just turned the whole top the right side round. I'm just going to flip those cuffs over about 1 inch, and you can stitch all the way around if you like. This is a Cielo top from Closet Case, and that's stitched all the way around. You can do that. Or if you prefer the cuff to have a more of a turned back feel, which is the look that this is going for, you can just stitch in the ditch, which all that means is you get your needle right into that seam there, and you secure it at the bottom, and then you can just put a hand stitch at the top, just to secure it, to stop it constant. This fabric probably won't stay as well as a linen will, but just make sure that you're covering that stitching there with your 1 inch turnover, which you should do if you came in by about 1/4 of an inch. Do that on both sleeves, give it a final press, and we're done. Right, so that's the top all finished. I hope you enjoyed that little sew along, and that you found it useful. I thought the bias binding method is actually quite a useful one to have in your sewing armoury, if you like. The other ones that I've made have been used making the bias binding tool rather than the fold over method that I demonstrated there. I think it probably makes the neckline a little bit larger. This is just it comes over my head okay, but I won't want it any smaller, shall I say. It's just one thing to watch, and I think it's a good pattern. I think it's a good basic pattern, and like I say, this is the 4th time I've made it. I've been sewing years. I don't find it a particularly boring make, but it's not a difficult make. Anybody can make this. It's a good one. There'll be all sorts of hacks for it. I did have a quick look on Instagram before I started filming, just to see if I could see anything. There doesn't seem to be a hashtag for it, so I bet you could make all sorts of hacks in it. You could certainly lengthen the sleeves, or do something different with the neckline.
make it longer, make it into maybe a tunic length or a dress length. You'd have to come out at the hips a little bit, I would imagine. But yeah, it's a good little pattern. So finally, if you have made this, let me know below, or if you're planning on making it after you've seen my versions, let me know below, and I will be back with you tomorrow with another little make. Okay, thank you. Bye.